Morning to everybody. If you'll go ahead and open your Bibles to Revelation 1:18. We actually studied verse 18, but just kind of as a review, I think if we go back and read it, we'll bring back our minds where we were when class time expired last time. John says in verse 18, this is Jesus talking to John. He says, I'm the living one, and I was dead, and behold, I'm alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. And we commented on that verse, and that should bring back to your memory things that we had there where Jesus claims to be the living one as a result of his resurrection. He was dead, but he was raised, and so now he's the living one, never to die again. And he has the keys of death and Hades. And we made the point that keys were always used figuratively in the New Testament. They represent authority to open, authority to use those keys. And so it signifies the power and the authority that Jesus had over death and Hades. Any comment on verse 18 before we go on to verse 19? In verse 19, he says, Write therefore the things which thou sawest, and the things which are, and the things which shall come to pass hereafter. So this is a specific command to John as to what he is to write. It's defined as the things which thou sawest. Now that refers to the first 18 verses of this chapter 1. John has already seen those things, and he's commanded to write those things, and then he says the things which are. And this refers to the conditions of the churches as we will be studying in the next two chapters, chapter 2 and 3. Those are present tense, the things which are, and Jesus is going to describe the conditions of those churches. Now, there is some material here in his description of these churches that is future, because he talks to the overcomer, and he tells the overcomer if he overcomes, he's going to receive certain blessings. Well, those blessings are future yet, but still, it falls into this category of the things which are that John is to write. And then he's to write the things that are quickly coming to pass or soon coming to pass. And this refers to chapters 4 through 22. So after we get out of the condition of the churches in chapter 3, we get into chapter 4. From 4 through 22 will be the things that are quickly coming to pass. And so this is kind of in a nutshell a description of what John is commanded to write. And if John is commanded to write that, and if he indeed did write that, then we know what Revelation is all about. It's about these three things: things which he saw, the things which are, and the things that are shortly coming to pass. This kind of puts in a nutshell what we're going to be studying in this book. And it's going to be of great encouragement to us, because we're going to see how those Christians who were persecuted and who were facing very severe persecutions were given the material that God felt they need to cause them to be faithful enough to go through these persecutions and to be victorious, to overcome. So this is probably the most encouraging book in all the New Testament, because it talks about the victory that God's people will receive if they will maintain their faith. Now, so this tells us then what Revelation is all, what has happened already, what is happening now, and some of what is going to happen in the future. And when we get over into chapters 21, 22, we'll see some of what's going to happen, but not all of what's going to happen, because he hasn't revealed everything to us. But what he has revealed is done in symbolic form and our imaginations can just soar about how beautiful heaven must be. And I think that's going to be a very good study. Any comment on verse 19? All right, verse 20, he says, the mystery of the 7 stars which thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks are the 7 churches. So he tells us here a little bit about what these mysteries are. We know a mystery is something that it's hidden, it's covered until it's revealed. Well, Revelation is the revelation of these mysteries. He's pulling the curtain aside, and he's letting us see some things that have been hidden up until this time. But he says here, what does the angel of the church signify? He says that the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. Now, so he tells us what the 7 stars are. They are the angels of the 7 churches. But what are the angels of the churches? What is the angel of the church? There's many different opinions about this, and I'll just let you know some of them here. Some opinions is that the men that were sent to John to inquire of his state were these angels. That's one opinion that people hold. And another opinion is that the angels are the ones who are responsible for each church's spiritual state. Now, I don't know, I doubt that either one of those is the case. I don't know that there's an angel responsible for our spiritual state here. If it is, this is the only place I know in the Bible where it's even mentioned. And another is that the angel of each church was the chief pastor or the chief bishop or the entire eldership of a church. Well, we know it's not the first two, because the Bible doesn't recognize a chief pastor or a chief bishop. Now, it could be the entire eldership. That may be the angel, but I doubt that, because the eldership consists of a plurality of elders. No church ever just had one elder. And but yet the angel is singular. The angel of the church at so-and-so is singular. So I don't think this is it either. Another opinion is that the angel of the church represents the powers or the character and the history and the life of the church. Now, this could be because we know that each church is known by certain characteristics, like the church at Ephesus was the church that left their first love, and the church at Laodicea was the church that was wretched and poor and naked. And so those were characteristics of the church, so it possibly could be this one, but I don't think that is the case either. Another opinion is that it's the heavenly counterpart of the churches or of the individuals. And again, I don't understand what our heavenly counterpart is. I know we have a soul, and our soul is in our body until our death, at which time our soul goes back to God who gave it, and I don't know that we have a heavenly counterpart, so I don't understand that one, but it is an opinion that some hold. Another opinion is that it's symbolic of the active versus the passive life of the church, and that's another one that's hard for me to understand. The active and the passive life. Our active life is what we do, but I don't know what our passive life is. It doesn't make sense to me, but this is an opinion that's been put forth. Another is that it's a spiritual character, the inward state or the prevailing spirit of a church. And this may be true because we know that each congregation has a certain spiritual character, an inward state or prevailing spirit. Another is that it's the evangelist of the church. or any individual who has an ear to hear. And these last two, I think it's one of these two, and we'll go into that and see why that's the case. So who is the angel of the church? Well, is he the elder of the church? Again, if he's the elder of the church, this is the only place in the Bible where one elder is singled out to do anything for a church that I know of. And I don't think that's the case, because it's always the elders, plural, that are charged with leading the congregation, overseeing them. And so I don't think it could be to the angel of the church, would be to the elder of the church. Which one would it be? You know, this is the way the Catholic Church started, is they started having ecumenical meetings, and they would appoint a leader of the meeting, and this leader gained prestige and power, and he became the Papa, the Pope. And by 606, the first Pope, Boniface III, was crowned as Pope. So I definitely don't believe this is the case. Is he the evangelist of the church? Now this has something to say for it because of who the evangelist is and what the evangelist does. We know that the evangelist is the one who is charged with delivering the message of the church. In 2 Timothy 4:2, where Paul wrote Timothy, he says, preach the word, be instant, in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort, with all long-suffering and teaching. So this is a charge that's given to the evangelist, and the evangelist is the one evangelist of the church. And that's what some people believe, that the angel of the church represents him. Well, since he is charged with preaching in season, out of season, reproving, rebuking, exhorting with all long suffering and teaching, it would fall in line with his duties that this is the case. Well, in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 5, we know Paul told Timothy, he says, watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist. So the evangelist has a work to do. Paul charged Timothy to do the work of an evangelist. Well, what is that work? It's preaching and teaching, exhorting, and this is his work. This is what he's to be engaged in doing, studying, edification, teaching the people. So it could be that the angel of the church to whom these letters are addressed is the evangelist of the church. It would be logical it would be him, because he's the one charged with disseminating the information that the congregation is supposed to have. So this could be it. But it can also, here each letter is addressed to the angel of the church at Ephesus, at Smyrna, Pergamum, and so forth. And then both angel and church are singular. So at the end of each letter, God says that he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the churches. So to me, in my way of thinking, this gives us another option as to who this angel is. I think he could be the one who has an ear to hear. And who is that? Who has an ear to hear? Well, it's anyone who hears and who obeys and who does. So he has an ear to hear. This message is written to him. Kathy?
Well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but in verse 10, it talks about, it's to the next church, but it talks about not to fear those things which you are about to suffer, for the devil is about to throw some of you, which is more than one person, into prison.
I didn't get that.
Verse 10.
Okay,
verse
10 of chapter 1.
2.
Oh, chapter 2. Okay, read that, please.
It says, do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested. You have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto that, and I will give you the crown of life. But he's talking about some of you, as in
Yeah,
plural.
so he's talking to the church there. And but this is addressed to the angel of the church. And if the angel of the church is him who has an ear to hear, or the evangelist, either one, they are to take this message and disseminate it and teach it and preach it to the various ones. Now, if you read on down further, he closes that out with, "He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches," plural. So this means that whoever has an ear to hear is to listen to the letter to each church. And he's to take all of that and to teach that. And so it falls in line with this point here. Look at the board. Here only the he is singular, while churches is plural, indicating that the hearer is to hear what the Spirit says to all the churches. Now, what we have is this. We have the angel of the church is addressed in every letter, while he that hath an ear is to hear what the Spirit says to all the churches. So, therefore, we can draw the conclusion, if the one who is addressed is to hear, and whoever has an ear is to hear, it seems that the angel symbolizes him who has an ear to hear. Now, people, we all have ears, but we do not all have ears to hear. And where Jesus warned people in his day of those who had ears, but they didn't hear. So, and he says, "Blessed are your ears and your eyes, for you hear the things that many up in the old days wanted to hear." They didn't hear him, but you do hear him, and he blessed this. But those to whom Jesus spoke, not all of them heard his message. And this is when the apostles came to him and asked him, "Why do you teach to them in parables?" And he says, "Well, blessed are your eyes and ears, because you see and hear, but for those that do not see and hear, then that's why I speak to them in parables." So this lets us know that the Word is written in such a way as to keep the message hidden from one whose heart is not right. Who is the person who has an ear to hear?
Christians.
Huh?
Christians.
Yeah, not all Christians, because not all Christians will hear. Who is the one, who is the Christian that has an ear to hear?
One that hears and obeys.
The one that has the attitude to submit his will to God's will. That's what an ear to hear means, the one who obeys. See, but not all Christians will obey. Now, when I use the name Christian, I'm using it loosely, because in my way of understanding, a genuine Christian is one who is in good standing with God. And we know that this is not the case. There are going to be many in the church. There are many in the kingdom that are going to be lost, because it's like the parable of the net. The net cast, and it brought forth peace, all kinds of fish, and yet they were separated. And the parable of the tares. Those parables teach that not everyone in the kingdom is going to be saved. Bonnie?
There are a lot of people who consider themselves Christians that won't end up in the right place.
Well, yeah, simply because they don't obey God.
Because they don't hear.
Yeah, and but that's a good study that we could have sometime, as a study of what it means to hear. Jesus told the Jews, the ones who opposed him, he says that you did not hear John because you weren't baptized. But he says the publicans and sinners heard him because they were baptized. So who heard him and who didn't hear him.
Those that hear really follow through.
Yeah, the hearer obeys. And so this is why I think that the angel of each church could either be the evangelist or any Christian who has an ear to hear. And I rather believe that that's who the angel is. I think the angel of the church. So Jesus is having John address these letters and to the church at Ephesus, to the church at Smyrna, to the church at Pergamum, and so forth. And then he closes out that letter, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So I think the letter is written to all Christians, but only those who have an ear to hear are to hear what the Spirit says to how many of the churches? To all of them. So that means that he is to take what the Spirit says to all the churches. He's to study it, he's to digest it, he's to submit himself to it, he's to obey it, and he's to teach it. You see, and that's really what Christianity is all about. Every Christian should be a teacher. Hebrews 5 verse 12. For the time that you ought to be teachers, you have need that someone teach you again the things that be the first principle. So he's writing to the whole church there. They should have been teachers, but they weren't. They hadn't grown. And I think that this kind of illustrates here what is being said. Is any comment on this verse 20? So,
I wondered, couldn't this have simply been, that doesn't mean that there's an angel for every church, but that angels were chosen to put this message out to these churches, which to these churches is also to the rest of the churches.
you mean a literal angel? Could this be a literal angel?
It could be, and that was chosen for this message right here.
Well, then you're saying that each church has an angel.
No.
Well,
I'm saying that these angels could have been chosen for this particular purpose to put out this message, which is to all churches.
well,
But I don't know.
we're going to see that the 7 churches here. We've already talked about the number 7 talks about 7 literal churches, but it's figurative for all the churches everywhere. And when we get into chapters 2 and 3, we'll see that these 7 churches have every condition that a church can have. There's not any condition a church can have, even today. There's no condition a church can have today that you can't find in one of these 7, because they're symbolic of all churches. And so the 7 churches of Asia is symbolic of the church of Christ in the world, the universal church, all the churches. And I don't want to say it's symbolic of the universal church. I'd rather say it's symbolic of all local congregations, because, of course, all local congregations are in the universal church, but they don't make up the universal church. The universal church is made up of individuals, and some of these individuals band themselves together to worship at a certain place, and that's the local church at that place. And we'll get into that more, especially in our meeting. Our meeting will delve into that, because the meeting on Thursday night of our meeting is all about that very subject. That's why there's problems between churches of Christ today, because so many Christians don't understand what the church is. They don't know. And but we'll get into that. But if angel is used symbolically here, Bertha, I don't think it would mean that. Now, we'll get into this more as we go through the different churches. We've got 7 of them to talk about, and we'll talk about this at those times, okay? Any other comment? Okay.
I know in Matthew 18 it said in there, each of us has an angel, Moses, basic God.
I can't hear you.
I said, Matthew 18, it says that each angel, that we have an angel, each other beholds the face of God constantly. Each of us has an angel, it says in Matthew 18.
Each of us has an angel.
In Matthew 18, it says that each of us has an angel that beholds the face of God constantly, it says.
I know Jesus talks about Jesus said that the children have angels that stand before God, but
Where is child?
I can't hear. I can't understand.
We're his child.
They're his children.
No, he's talking about the little children. They're little children that the disciples tried to keep away from Jesus. Anyone, you want to read that?
Well, it says, see that you despise not one of these little ones, for I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father. Who
Okay,
is-"
they're angels. Who is the there?
We're becoming as little children. It's us. It's us.
No, they brought little children to him, Brother Paul, and let's find that. I want
It's in 18:10.
18:10. See that you don't look down on one of these little ones, because I tell you that in heaven their angels continually view the face of my Father in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save the lost. What do you think if a man has 100, and he goes on into the parable of the lost sheep?
Verse 4, whosoever shall humble himself as little child, the same as the great kingdom of heaven. It goes on. And we're just, in his eyes, we're just little children. And we'll have an angel who holds the face of God.
So, what's your point, Brother Paul?
Well, the point is that we each have an angel who holds the face of God. It
That
says
each
little
one-
children. It means that we humble ourselves as little children. But it goes on to say that what he's representing is each one of us then has an angel.
So,
So what I'm saying is, it speaks about the angel here, but he said there it's also in Matthew that it speaks about the angel that's before us, that appears before God for us. And this angel beholds the face of God constantly.
so
But I read Matthew 18 as us being those little children in his eyes. We humble ourselves.
well, we are. We certainly are God's children, and I think you may be right in that those who are young in the faith and are weak would be called his little children, because Jesus says if we offend one of these little ones, and then it's better for that a millstone be hung around our neck and we be cast into the sea. Well, who is one of the little ones? It's one of the young Christians, one who is weak in the faith. So we can't do that. And
Well, it is one of them still have an angel.
pardon me?
I think we'll have an angel no matter whether we're weak in faith.
Well, you may be right. I may be wrong. You may be right. We may each have an angel. But let's say that we do. Just a minute, Bonnie, please. Let's say that we do each have an angel. Okay? This letter is addressed to the angel of the church at
Right.
Ephesus. Okay, let's say that we each have an angel. And he writes to the angel of the church at Hartman Church of Christ. Which one of us is that going to be? How are we going to know who it is? You see, I don't think there's any way of saying, well, Brother Harold, that's you, or Sister Bonnie, that's you. You are the angel of the church here. How are we going to know? But if the angel of the church is him who has an ear to hear, and this one who has an ear to hear is responsible for teaching this to all the church, then we know who it is. It could be all of us. It could be half of us. It could be 2 or 3 of us, because we have an ear to hear. He that hath an ear to hear is individual, in other words. But if you say, to the angel of the church at Heartland Church of Christ, we're not going to know who that is.
Angels are in heaven.
Pardon me?
The angels are in heaven.
Do what?
The angels are in heaven.
No, Brother Paul is saying that each of us has an angel.
But the angels are in heaven.
Okay, so he writes this letter to the angel in heaven. And that's what you're saying?
I don't know.
Well,
But I just see that he picked
that's-
7 churches to represent all the churches.
Yeah.
And he chose 7 angels to represent those 7 churches. I think, did the angels do the speaking? What did the angels do?
Angels minister to God on our behalf. Hebrews 1, verse 22, 23, somewhere in
But
there.
he chose 7 churches to represent all of us. And he gave those 7 churches an angel for the purpose of getting this message across to us. Wouldn't that be less complicated than trying to figure out who the angel is on earth?
It wouldn't be to me, Sister Bertha, because I wouldn't know how to interpret that.
But you're putting it as the angel is here on earth. Which one does he represent on earth? But he's in heaven.
Brother Paul?
Hebrews 13, it says in there that don't fail to entertain strangers, but some of you entertain angels unawares.
Yeah. You think we can entertain angels today?
Unawares.
You believe that we can do that today?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think we need to have a study on angels, and I hate to get bogged down here on that, because we're never going to get through Revelation if this is the case. Revelation is a book of symbols, and it's symbolic in form, and these symbols represent something, and we've got to keep that in mind, or we're not going to get the message for it. So I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to go on or stop and take time and study angels. Bonnie?
I have a footnote in mine that says, one of these little ones describes either a little child or a believer.
Yeah. One who is weak in the faith, but I don't think it's a little child like I had said earlier. I think it's a young Christian, a babe in Christ. Well, I don't know what to do. What do y'all want to do? Y'all want to go ahead and press on and just have this as a point of contention that we don't come to an agreement on?
Go on with your studies, Jenny. You need to interrupt your
Well, I don't want you to feel like you can't bring up your opinion about something. I want you to do that. But I want us to realize that there are opinions. I just went through 9 opinions before I went into the last 2 here. And people have different opinions. And we don't have to agree on these opinions. And we don't have to get our feelings hurt when we don't agree. We just accept the fact that there are differences of opinions. Now, if it's a matter of faith, then there's no room for opinions. If it's something that's important to our soul salvation, which I think Ephesians 4 verses 1 through 3 and 4 tell us what those 7 points are. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one body, and one spirit. These are the things we've got to be united on. But some things like this, I don't think that we have to be. Any comment on that? Okay. The mystery of the 7 stars which thou sawest in my right hand. and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks are 7 churches. So there's no question as to who the candlesticks are, because he tells us there's 7 churches. We're informed that the 7 candlesticks are the 7 churches, so we don't have to doubt that, discuss it, wonder who it is or anything. But each candlestick being separate here, I think, is figurative of the autonomy of each congregation, because the candlestick at Ephesus, the candlestick at Smyrna, the candlestick at Pergamum were different. They were connected with one another. And Jesus was in their midst so that he had a relationship with all of them. And they being separate, I think, is symbolic of the autonomy of each congregation in the Lord's body. This congregation in Heartland is completely separate from the congregation at Frostproof or the congregation in Memphis, Tennessee, anywhere. It's separate. And I think that that's what that indicates there. Each individual member is to hear what is said to all the churches, what the Spirit says to all the churches. And thus each angel or each member who has an ear to hear is to exhort each member of that church to hear what the Spirit says to all the churches. But so this is what I believe about the angels of the church and the 7 golden candlesticks, that the angel represents the member who has an ear to hear. So the whole entire word is to be taught to and by all members if they have an ear to hear. If a member has an ear to hear, he's to take what he hears and to apply it to his life and to teach it to others. What does he hear? He hears what the Spirit says to all the churches, which is the entire Word of God. He doesn't just hear part of it, but he hears all of it. Is there any comment on verse 20? Any comment on chapter 1? Because that brings us to an end of chapter 1. Okay, chapter 2 begins the letters to the 7 churches, and of course the first one is the church at Ephesus. And this church has a very long history. At the close of the second missionary journey, the Apostle Paul came back through Ephesus. He had Aquila and Priscilla with him, and he stayed there probably for 2 or 3 weeks. But he was in a hurry to get on to Jerusalem, and they begged him. This is in Acts 18. They begged him to stay, but he says, no. He says, I'm going to go, but he'll come back. And so he went, and then he came right back, probably within a period of just a month or 2 months, something like this, as quick as he could make the trip. And he got back. Well, while he was gone, Apollos came. This is at Ephesus. But he left Priscilla and Aquila there, and I think Apollos came there, and they taught Apollos the way of God more perfectly. And then Apollos went on to Corinth, and Paul came back right after Apollos left, and so he began the 3rd missionary journey, and he stayed at Ephesus. This was probably 53 until about 57. He stayed there longer than any place he had ever been. 3 years at Ephesus. And so when he left Ephesus, later he sends Timothy back to Ephesus to set in order the things that are wanting there. And then later still, probably about 67, he sent Titus to Ephesus on some task. And then when Titus left, but before 70 AD, the Apostle John came to Ephesus and made that his home, and he left Jerusalem because Jerusalem was under attack and the Romans were going to destroy Jerusalem, and so the Christians got out, and John came to Ephesus, and he made that his home until he was exiled, probably in 95. So we've got from about 53 AD all the way to 95, 42 years, isn't it? 42 years there, of where this church at Ephesus had these good, solid, grounded teachers. And we would expect a congregation that had teachers like that to be well grounded in the faith, would we not? Well, that's exactly what we find at Ephesus, because we're going to see some of the things that are mentioned there. John uses some identifying features of Jesus Christ out of chapter 1 when he writes to these churches, to all except one, Philadelphia. And when he writes to the church of Philadelphia, he does not use one of the identifying features of Christ in chapter 1. But that's the only one of the 7 that he does not. And there's a pattern that's used in the address to each church. And this pattern consists of, he says, I know thy works. He says that to every church. I know thy works. He enumerates any good qualities. And now if you don't have a King James Version, it may not be, I know thy works in every letter. And King James has that. And then he informs them of any problems that they may have. And then if applicable, he exhorts the church and each member of the church to either repent or do what needs to be done. And he informs them of the blessings for faithfulness. And so this is kind of a pattern that we're going to see in every church. These things are going to, I know thy works. He enumerates any good qualities, if there are any good qualities. He informs of any problems that they may have, if they have problems. Now, Church of Philadelphia didn't have any problem. And so if applicable, he exhorts the church and each member of the church, and he informs them of the blessings for faithfulness. So we learn here from Ephesus something about a church, and that's how important love is. Before we go on does anyone have any comment on verse 1? Okay, verse 2, he says, I know thy works, and thy toil and patience, and that thou canst not bear evil men, and didst try them that call themselves apostles, and they are not, and didst find them false. So he starts listing the works that they have. Now let's look closely at this. He says, I know thy works. Who's he writing to? Yeah, he's writing to the angel of the church there. I know thy works. So this lets us know that a congregation of the Lord's people is to have works. And they are to look at some of the things about their works. They toil. And this word toil here means that they suffer like a woman suffers labor pains. When a woman is in labor, would you think that she's toiling? I would. I know I saw when my wife was in labor, she toiled, she squirmed and sweated and made faces and grinced and all that. I'd call that toil. It's the same word here. This congregation in Ephesus toiled. They toiled. They had patience. This word patience is hupomune. They stood up under the load and they stood with it. They stayed with the load that was on them. And they could not bear evil people. Who do you think evil people are here in this context? Yeah, those who don't obey God. In fact, he says, you tried them that call themselves apostles and they are not, and you found them to be liars. So they proved that these people who claimed to be apostles were liars. So this takes some scriptural knowledge here. So we have a list of commendations of this church, if you read verses 2 through 8, of about 8 or 9 different commendations that they have. Sound like a pretty strong congregation, doesn't it? It does. Well, we would expect that if they had the teachers that we talked about. But it only takes one sin to condemn us. Works is anything that requires energy. It can be thinking, it can be doing, it can be mental, it can be physical. That's what works is. The word means anything that requires energy. Jesus says this to a congregation. So congregations have works. And if a congregation doesn't have works, and we're going to find one that doesn't, we'll find out what the Lord thinks about it. And but look at the works that are mentioned here in this verse. They toil, they have patience, they can't bear evil men. They put them to the test and find out that they're liars. And in verse 3, he says, and thou hast patience and didst bear for my name's sake, and hast not grown weary. So they have borne here. They have endured for the sake of Christ, which lets us know that they went through some persecution. There were some tribulations brought upon them because they were Christians, because it was for the namesake of Christ. And they haven't grown weary in doing it. So the church bore, took a load, and picked it up, and carried it. Patience here is mentioned for the second time. It's steadfast endurance. They stood up under a load. They didn't wilt under the load that was placed on them. They labored for Jesus' name's sake, and this must be the motive for a church to labor. It's got to be for Christ.
I use the word persevere.
That's a very good synonym. Perseverance. They persevered. They had tenacity. They hung on. But everything they did was done for his name's sake. They did it for Christ. And that's very commendable. You know, a lot of congregations do things, but they don't do it for Christ. They do it for themselves. They do it so that they'll have a reputation. They do it for show. They do it to get an audience. They do it to get a crowd. They don't do it for Christ. But Jesus said they did it here for Christ. Now, and they did not become so wearied in doing it that they quit. And we need to remember this, you know, when we set out to do something, let's get down the road a ways. It gets difficult. Let's don't throw up our hands and say, well, I didn't know it was going to be this much trouble. We just call it off. And I've seen that happen, and you probably have too. Well, but, verse 4, Jesus says, I have this against thee, that thou didst leave thy first love. So, imagine now a church being so involved in being right, and I think Ephesus was. They had all these things going for them. I mean, they were right. They were right down the line, but they forgot their motive for being right. What is our motive for being Christians? It's got to be love for God. It's got to be love for Him, love for the truth, love for Christ. That has to be, you know, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13, no matter what he did, he could even give his body to be burned, but if he has not love, it profiteth him what? Nothing. And so, these brethren had left their first love. And is it time? Okay. We'll start there with verse 4 next Wednesday night, Lord willing.